definitely so far. And before anything else, we would like to thank Glorieta, Ayala Center, Sharpie, Lily, Cathisto, Raffles Makati, Harper Collins, and of course, thank you to all of you for coming. My name is Sandra Ramos Padilla. I'm the purchasing director for National Bookstore. Thank you for supporting all of our books, and especially for supporting Mitch Albom's books. For today's event, our special guest, as you know, is an internationally renowned and best-selling author, journalist, screenwriter, playwright, radio and television broadcaster, and musician. His books have collectively sold 35 million copies worldwide. And they have been published in 48 territories and 44 languages around the world. And they have been made into Emmy Award-winning and critically acclaimed television movies. Have you all watched this movie? Tuesdays with Morrie. That breakthrough book, Tuesdays with Morrie, spent 4 years on the New York Times bestseller list and is now the most successful memoir ever published. So I hope nobody here came here and who hasn't read Tuesdays with Morrie. And his first novel is Five People You Meet in Heaven. And it is the most successful U.S. hardcover adult novel ever. And here is with us in Manila, the first phone call from heaven. So friends, please join me in welcoming Mitch Albom.
Hello, Philippines. Wow.
Mitch, you did say that one of your biggest fan base is Philippines, so they're out here to prove it.
Yeah, I think I believe it.
You said outside the U.S., you have most number of fans in the Philippines.
After the United States, apparently the biggest group of readers I have in the world is right here in the Philippines. So thank you so much. And I can't believe so many people are here.
Let's show Mitch how much we love his books. Can you wave your books?
Well, thank you so much for coming. And thank you all for who. I know somebody was here since 4 o'clock this morning.
Wow, hindi ko kaya yun.
I'm really sorry you had to wait so long. But I promise that I'll try to get to every single one of you. I'll probably be here till next year, but
Mitch, I will take our seats. I have some serious questions for Mitch, so maybe we can sit with him for a bit before the book signing. Mitch, tell us how you started writing.
Actually, I was a musician before I wrote anything. And it was only when I wasn't successful at writing music that one day I was in a supermarket and they had a newspaper that they were giving away with the groceries. And I looked at it and it said, if you have free time, well, you can come and volunteer for the newspaper. So since I was a musician, I was working at night. So during the day, I had free time. And I went and I volunteered for the newspaper. And they didn't pay me anything. But it seemed like I must have had a little talent. And I started writing ever since then.
How did you transition from journalist to novelist?
Well, I was a sports writer in America. I know basketball is very big here in the Philippines. Does anybody here like the Detroit Pistons? That's my team, because I live in Detroit. I know it's not the Miami Heat, but we try.
Hindi ko alam eh. Bumibili
So I was a sports writer in Detroit, and I was pretty successful.
Hindi ko alam.
And then one day, I happened to be turning the television screen, and I saw an old professor of mine named Morrie, realized that I hadn't kept in touch with him for 16 years. And I felt very guilty about that because I should have and I didn't. And so I called him up. I was going to just make one phone call, but after talking to him, I felt kind of guilty, so I went to visit him. I was going to visit him just once, but I felt kind of guilty, so I went back again, and again, and again. And at some point, he told me that he was very much in debt for his medical bills because he couldn't pay his bills, and he was afraid that after he died, his family was going to have to sell his house. And they were going to not have any money and be broke. And so I got the idea that maybe I could help him pay his bills by writing a book. And believe it or not, I went to about 10 different publishers in New York with this idea for a book called Tuesdays with Maury, and almost all of them said, not interested. It's boring. It's depressing. And I would have probably given up, except that I really needed to help him with bills, so I kept pushing. And we found one publisher who was willing to publish the book 3 weeks before Maury died. And they gave us the money, and I gave it to Maury, and he paid his bills. And that, to me, was kind of the end of the visits, but I still had to write the book. And poor Maury never got a chance to see any of that book. He never read a sentence of that book because I wrote it after he passed away. And it came out. It was supposed to be a very, very small book. They only printed about 20,000 copies. But something very, very special happened with that book. People like you read it, and then gave it to somebody, and then gave it to somebody, and then gave it to somebody. And today that book is the biggest selling memoir in the history of the world.
And Maury has touched all our lives.
Well, thank you very, very much, all of you who've read Tuesdays with Maury. It means a lot to me that Maury is taught here in the schools, and that he gets to continue to teach, even though he's not here. He's still teaching so many people, and that really is a wonderful thing. And it just goes to show you that if you touch one person like he touched me, you never know. You might end up touching the whole world, because I wrote a book, and you read it, and you read it, and you read it, and you read it, and now Maury, who isn't even here on Earth, still gets to affect so many people because he took the time to be nice to one person. So, to me, that's a great lesson of that book, and I really want to thank you all for being part of that real big classroom.
6 years later, you wrote your first novel, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. Can you tell us about Eddie, main character? He spent some time here in the Philippines, didn't he?
Yes, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven was my first novel, and it was inspired by a real person who was my Uncle Eddie, who was just like the Eddie in that book. And he fought here in the Philippines during World War II. He fought against the Japanese during World War II. And I used to ask him when I was a kid, did you ever kill anybody? And he said, I don't know, I might have, because in those days, it wasn't like today. If you fired into the darkness, you didn't know if you killed anybody or not. And so I always thought that was a terrible thing to have to carry with you for your whole life. And so Eddie used to think that he was a nobody, that he didn't matter, the real Eddie. He used to say to me, I'm nothing, I've never been nowhere, I've done nothing. And that always hurt me because I really loved him, and I thought he was great. And so I wanted to write a book that would sort of be a message to people like him that there's no such thing as a nobody. Everybody is somebody. Everybody affects somebody. And so I wrote this book about this guy named Eddie, and he dies trying to save a little girl at an amusement park, and he goes to heaven, and he meets 5 people from his life. Because the real Eddie told me a story when I was a kid that I never forgot. He was rushed to open heart surgery one time, and he said that he died during the operation, and that his soul floated out from his body over the bed, and that he looked down on his body, and he saw all of his relatives who had died before him, waiting for him at the end of the bed. So I, of course, said, well, what did you do? What did you do? And he said, I told him, go away, I'm not ready for any of you. And apparently they went away back to heaven, and he came back into his body, and he lived another 10 years. But in my mind, that meant that when you die, there's people waiting for me. So I got this idea that, well, in my book, Eddie would die and he'd have people waiting for him, but they wouldn't necessarily be his relatives. They might just be someone he met maybe for 5 minutes, maybe someone he didn't even know that he had met. And that became a character which probably is best known here, a little girl, a little Filipino girl named Tala. And she ends up being the key to his whole life because he accidentally kills her in a fire during the war, but she forgives him, and then at the end of his 5 people, she tells him that the reason that he spent his whole life taking care of children was to make up for the fact that he had accidentally killed her when he was younger, and so this was his life. And so this life that he thought had no meaning or no purpose actually had a great purpose, and it all made sense once you understood it in heaven. So Tala became a very favorite character of mine, but I have to say that I did not know what Tala meant when I wrote the name. Now I know what it means. I know what it means now because after the book came out, every single one of you wrote me a letter. And I got so many letters saying, Tala means star, and how did you know that? You must speak Filipino and come to the Philippines. And so ever since then, I've always felt a very close connection with this country, and I'm glad that I got a chance to come.
Without getting into any spoilers, can you tell us about your latest novel, The First Phone Call from Heaven? Where did you get the idea?
Well, the idea for The First Phone Call from Heaven came actually from a sad event. My mother was very important in my life and was a great communicator, and she really taught me how to communicate and how to write. About 3 or 4 years ago, she suffered a very bad stroke, and she lost the ability to speak, and she hasn't spoken since that day. And while she's still alive, and I can still hold her hand and look at her, she can't say a word, and I don't even know if she knows it's me. And it's very heartbreaking to have somebody that you love and you lose their voice. You can't talk to them anymore. So I began to realize how important the voice really is in how we connect to each other. And I began to notice how when people die, their relatives save their answering machine messages just so that they can hear a voice on their phone, even if the message is, let's go shopping or something like that. So I decided to write a book that explained the preciousness of the human voice and our connections to one another. So in the book, The First Phone Call from Heaven, one day this little town in America wakes up and the phones start ringing, and it's the voices of their loved ones calling from heaven to tell them that they're okay. But it only happens in this one little town, no place else on earth. And the book follows a story of how the story leaks out, and a news reporter comes and writes a story about it. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and people start coming to this town from all over the world, and everybody wants to connect with this miracle, but it only keeps happening to these same few people. And meanwhile, there's one man in the town who was in prison, and he gets out of prison, his wife dies, and very bad things keep happening to him, and he doesn't believe in anything. And one day his son comes home, 7 years old, with a little toy phone and says, Daddy, when is Mommy going to call us from heaven? And he gets very angry and he decides he's going to prove this is a hoax. And the book gallops along as everybody gets bigger, bigger, bigger on this miracle. He keeps thinking it's a hoax, it's a hoax, it's a hoax. And it all kind of comes to a big culmination right towards the end of the book with a broadcast for a crowd kind of like this of what's supposed to be the first phone call live from heaven. The whole world is going to hear the voice from heaven, and it's going to prove that there is a heaven, just when it seems like he's figured out what's going on. If I tell you any more, I'll ruin the book. But that's the story of the book.
I think it's a brilliant book. I enjoyed reading it. And how about For One More Day? We read that it was inspired by your own
One More Day.
All his books.
You like that book? Well, I'm glad you like that book because
you're nothing like the lead character, right?
Yes, that book was very autobiographical, even though it's a novel. Many of the stories in the book actually happened to me between me and my mother. And in fact, my mother, you might remember the story from that book. One time I was in a library when I was about 8 years old, and I wanted to take out a book, and I brought it to the librarian, but I was such a little scrawny kid that she took one look at me, and she said, "This book is too hard for you. Put So I put it back, so I did what I was told, and I took out a Curious George book, a book about the monkey. And my mother came to pick me up from the library because my mother was the one who taught me it's very important to read. You have to read, you have to read, every week you have to read. So she would take me to the library and force me in there every week. So she came to pick me up and I got in the car and she saw that I was holding a Curious George book. And she said, "Why did you get that book? You've read that book a lot of times." And I said, "Well, I wanted to get another book, but the librarian wouldn't let me take it." And she said, "Why wouldn't she let you take it?" And she said it was too hard for me. You know, the car came to a complete stop, and she backed it up, pulled back, and she grabbed me by the arm, and she marched into the library, and she pointed at the librarian, and she said, "Did you tell him that a book was too hard for him?" The woman was all like, "Oh," and she said, "Well, he's so young." And she said, "Never tell a child that a book is too hard for him, and never this child." And then she grabbed the book and she shoved it in my arms and we left. I don't even think we paid for it, took it out. I think it just walked out. So that's in that book, but that's a true story, and so are many others. And as it turns out, I gave that book to my mother. She didn't know I was writing it, and when I finished it, I got the first copy from the publisher and I gave it to her. And I said, "Please read this book. It explains a lot of how I feel about the things that happened between you and me." As it turned out, she had that stroke about a year later. And so it turned out to be the last book that she ever read. So it was very dear to me, and I'm glad that you like it because it was a very special book to me. And it was the last book that my mother got.
Her pictures are beautiful.
Her pictures, those are her pictures at the back of the book. Yeah, that's what they are.
You tirelessly work with a number of charities and causes. Can you tell us about these organizations?
Well, Maury told me when I was with him that you need to be involved with your community. And he asked me, "What do you do for charity?" And at that time I said, "Well, I write checks." He said, "Well, anybody can write a check. You have to do more because you were given a voice and you have the ability to write. You need to use the voice to do more than just make yourself famous. You need to do some good for other people." And he was right. And so I started my first charity in 1995 to help people in Detroit, to help kids in Detroit study the arts. And since then I've formed a number of other charities in Detroit to help the homeless people who live there, to help the poor people who live there, to give houses to people who don't have them. And then I got involved with Haiti, and I ended up operating an orphanage in Haiti, where I go every month for 3 or 4 days for the last 4 years. And it was partly because of what I saw in Haiti, how a country was so devastated by an earthquake, and how we took in these small children who didn't have anything to eat, and who didn't have any education, and we were able to bring them in and give them an education, give them beds, and give them a place to sleep. That I realized how big a difference a person can make, even one person can make, by showing some concern when a disaster hits. And so, to be honest with you, as I said before, I've been asked to come to the Philippines a number of times, and I've never been able to do it. And I get asked every year, and every year I say I can't, and every year they come back, and every year I say they can't, and every year you come back. And this year, after this book came out, I got another call, "Would you please come to the Philippines?" But this year, because of what happened with the typhoon, I thought that was maybe a sign from God that I really needed to come here and see if there was anything that I might be able to do to help in that capacity. So I told the people at the National Bookstore they could arrange for me to go to that region, go to Tacloban, any place like that, and I would come. So they were very nice, and what we've arranged to do is actually very exciting because we're going to Tacloban on Monday, and we're going to go up there, and I've donated 40 boats to the fishermen. And each boat, apparently, I've seen pictures of the boats, they're yellow, and each boat has the name of one of my books on it, which is it's going to be very strange when one fisherman asks the other fisherman, "What are you doing with a boat called Tuesdays with Maury?" But more importantly, we're going to go to some schools there, and we are going to promise to rebuild 10 libraries in the schools. And then we're going to stop wanted books,
One more
so
day.
I'm bringing up several hundred of my books to start. And then I asked the people at the National Bookstore, listen, do you want me to call some of my friends in America who are writers, and you wanted me to see if maybe they would send 10 books of their own, you know, that they would sign, that would go into these libraries. And Miguel from the National Bookstore said, yeah, if you can do that, that would be great. So since I've been here, I've been calling back to the United States, emailing and sending messages, and so far I've gotten yeses from, let's see,
Dan Brown?
John Grisham, Stephen King, Nicholas Sparks, Suzanne Collins, who wrote The Hunger Games, Jeff Kinney, who wrote Whippy Kid, Amy Tan, Khaled Hosseini, many, many more. And they've all said yes. And so I'm going to bring a book of theirs up there. I'm going to try to restock these libraries as a way of our American writers saying that we care about you here in the Philippines.
And the Yellow Boat Foundation also thanks. We'll meet them
You're
tomorrow in Cebu.
Ate.
But
Ano,
not
habal siya?
only are you good friends with these writers, we heard that you also have a rock band.